Hey fellas, welcome to part 2 of Tamiya's 1/48 scale Corsair build. In this episode I get it all together. I think, did I show rivets last time? I don't know. When I do these, I don't review it before I do this little intro because I do the intro last after I film. And then I forget what I show on the video. But either way, this is the point that we get to, and I get it ready to prime. Somebody asked me to show a lot of my paint work this time, so all right, fellas, we'll do a long painting part. So it'll probably be 2 or 3 parts for painting. Haven't quite decided on which scheme I'm going to do yet. I'm not going to use the kit decals. I'm going to make a generic plain with a random number, probably 69, the number I'm going to use. Yeah, I'm not going to use Tamiya decals because there's not a whole lot of decals other than the insignia and maybe some numbers and stuff. And I'm going to make those with my Cricut and paint them on. So anyway, let's get on with this video where I get it all together. I think I add some rivets and some other stuff. So enjoy. All right, fellas. So what I'm doing now is I'm going along and I'm cleaning up the seam lines along the top and the bottom of the fuselage. So how I'm doing this is I'm trying to go a panel at a time, trying to reduce obliterating more detail than is necessary. So how I'm doing this is I'm using really small sanding sticks. Now I've got a couple different grits. This is probably my heaviest grits. Now these two are actually different grits. They're just 2 different brands. So this is probably my coarsest grit. And then I've got one that's a little less coarse. And this one is probably pretty fine. And it's old, so it's worn down a little bit. And then I've got this one, which I use to like polish it up and remove some bigger scratches. So how I'm doing is I'm just going panel by panel. Now, you can see I've already got this one done. And I've actually put in, I sanded away the detail that was present because it was just kind of in the way. And it was pretty soft anyway. I went ahead and sanded all that out, and then I re-scribed it using these scribing templates that I got. What brand are these? Dream Model. This one is a U-Star. So I just picked these up off eBay or Amazon. They're just little scribing templates. I've got a bunch of them. And I use a dental pick to just re-scribe in that detail. Now, right along here, I've got these panel lines. So I just use a razor saw and come along and I deepen those. And you can actually do this too before you start sanding. So I've got just to deepen it so I don't lose it as much. So I'm just scribing right along there. Now, right along here, I'm going to have to obliterate some of this detail, so I have to scribe it back in, but it shouldn't be too big of a deal. Now, there are going to be some areas, probably right along the top, that I'm going to have to use some of my CA glue and metallic pigment filler, but I'll cross that road when I get there. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just sanding away and trying to get this nice and uniform. So I'll take my coarse sanding stick, get it down nice and flush. I'm just using this to remove a lot of material, and I'll come back with this one and I'll start sanding away those scratches. And I've got a pretty good joint up here. There wasn't hardly any step whatsoever. So I'm not going to have to use any filler right here, which is nice because I want to try to avoid that if I can. I've also got some water, so I'll wet this down when I go to use my really fine sanding stick. And when I do prime this, any really tiny micro scratches that are in the plastic are going to get filled in. But I want to get it as smooth as possible and to match the rest of the plastic as best that I can. Okay. Looks like I can see a little bit of the hump. Okay. Just hold it up to the light and make sure I got it nice and smoothed out. Now I am obliterating some of these rivets. So what I've got to repair those is I've got a little bitty drill bit. Let's go ahead and make sure this panel line is cleaned out. So I'll just take my razor saw and I'm just lightly going over this. And I can take my RB production scriber and get some of that stuff out. And then I've got a toothbrush and a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. Let's clean this area up and get some of those greeblies out. And I can come in here with my drill bit. And what I'm doing with the drill bit is I'm just coming in, twisting a little bit and putting those back. Now, the way I have my camera set up, the lighting's not real good for me to see right here. So I'm not going to do all these right now. I'm going to do it when I can position this in the lighting so I can see where I actually need to put these rivets back. Just like so, just enough. I don't want to go too deep. Okay. All right. Looks pretty good. And then I can come back with this Mr. Hobby Cement S. It's like Tamiya extra thin, but it's a little more mild. And then I can just come along here. And what this does is it softens up that panel line that I had to rescribe and softens up the rivet detail. So then I get it to where it's going to look pretty much close to the way it was or the way it's supposed to look. And that's just how I'm doing this. So I'll just go ahead and I'll work my way up a little by little, just trying not to obliterate too much detail. And then do the bottom. Now, because this is a 48 scale kit, there's not a, it's not going to take me too long. But I am going to have to use some filler up here, but I'll sand that away, see where filler needs to go, and then I'll just fill it in with my CA glue and metallic pigment. So I've got the fuselage taken care of, and there are only a few little spots where I needed some CA glue and metallic pigment. You can kind of see the black here, but everything looks pretty good. And I think once I get primer on, it's going to look nice and neat. But before I put the fuselage onto the wings, what I want to do is I want to add some rivet detail onto the wings because I'm going to do some weathering. And I looked at some pictures and it showed some chipping right along some rivet detail that's not present on the Tamiya kit. So I'm just adding some in. So what I've done is I've kind of estimated it looking at some blueprints on where the rivets should be. Now, I'm not going to be a rivet counter and put exactly all the rivets exactly where they need to be, but I want to get pretty close. So what I've done is I've used my infinity cutting mat here, and I've cut out little sections, just estimating the distance based on the blueprints where the rivets should be, especially on the wing. And I'll probably do the fuselage as well because there's some rivets that go up and down. This is going to take a lot of time to do, but I think it's going to make it look pretty cool. So what I've done is I've just laid down my tape, and then I've taken a pen, ink pen, and just went along and marked where my rivet lines are going to be. And I've got my Rosie the riveter here. This is a 1mm riveter. And I'm just taking this and going right along my markings. And I'm just going to do one pass. I'm putting a little bit of pressure on this thing. Okay, and then I'll stop when I come to a panel line and then resume. All right. Now when you use these, you want to put pressure down like directly on it, over top of it. Let me close my shades here because the sun is coming in and wreaking havoc on what you'll be able to see. All right, I think that might be better. Okay, get my chair over here. You don't want to be like using this riveter and pushing it this way because then you'll mess up. You want to be going straight down with the pressure. Just like so. Now these aren't going to be real prominent. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll do this directly into the primer and it makes them a little bit more prominent. But I'm doing this into the plastic. I'm going to be able to see it once I paint it, but it's not going to be something just like stands out in a really deep rivets. These are going to be pretty shallow rivets. But I'm just going to use them as a guide when I go to do my chipping. At least that's my plan anyway. Okay. And then what I can do is I can take a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol and I can just wipe my ink away. Takes care of it pretty well. And then I'll be left with my embossed rivet detail. Right there. And there are a couple little, I'll have to look at my reference to see there's some rivet lines that come like right across here and then like right here. And then there's going to be rivet detail right along the upper edge of the wing. I don't know how much rivet detail I'm going to do on the bottom. I may do some, I don't know. We'll see when it gets there if I'm bored of doing rivets. But I've already got this section done and this section done. And then some other areas. And then there's going to be rivet detail right along here. And yeah, I think it's going to add some nice detail to my my model here. All right, fellas, I've went ahead and I've got all my rivets done on the entire plane. I got the fuselage, I've got the bottom of the wing, so I've got all my rivets done. But what I've done is I did something that I may end up regretting, but I'm not sure. I went ahead and I sanded down the rivets with some really fine sandpaper. This is 2000 grit. So I just sanded them down because if you've never used one of these Rosie the Riveter tools, it doesn't remove any material, it just pokes holes in it. So what happens is you get kind of a rough texture where the rivets, where the plastic kind of squishes up and you get these little peaks. So here, I can run my finger across it and you really can't hear it because I've sanded these down. But if you listen here, you can feel my fingernail scratching across the peaks of that plastic. So by taking this sandpaper and just knocking down those peaks, I get rid of that roughness. But by doing that, I don't know when I spray this down if the rivets are going to be prominent enough for me to see them. So it's been a while since I've done this, so I'm not really sure how this is going to work out. But I'm going to go ahead and do this throughout the whole thing. So I just got my 2000 grit sandpaper and I'm just going to knock those peaks down to get more of a smooth texture, because I really like I really like to get a nice smooth finish when I spray my models. But we're going to find out whether or not it totally obliterates these the rivet detail that I put down when I go to spray it. If it does, it does. No big deal. It's okay. Not the worst thing to ever happen. But we're going to find out what it looks like when I sand these down. And it doesn't take much. Obviously, this is 2000 grit, so it's not really coarse. I'm really not removing any plastic other than I'm just knocking down those peaks on the rivets. So that is what I'm going to do. So once I get this all taken care of, Then I can go ahead and I can glue the wings on. And it's gonna take a little bit of effort because I'm gonna have a seam line right along here that I'm gonna need to correct with some filler. And I want those to be lined up as best as possible because I don't want to have to rescribe too much detail in there. And it seems like there's going to be a little bit of a gap right along that ring root there that I'm going to have to fill in with some kind of putty. So I will probably do this off camera because it's going to take a little bit of finagling and I have to really be careful with it so I don't cause myself a lot of problems. So once I get this all sanded down, we'll glue the wings on, then we'll come back and take a look at what we got. All right, fellas, so I've got the wings on. They went on pretty well. Went ahead and I cleaned up that seam line right along there with some CA glue and metallic filler. And along the back just as well. And I did it just the same that I did the two halves of the fuselage. I just worked really tight and tried to be as precise as possible. And I think that's going to be okay. We'll see. Sometimes if I do it too soon, there'll be a ghost seam that kind of shows up. And that's because when I use the Tamiya Extra Thin, it takes a long time really for that to cure. I did this about 30 hours after I glued it with the Tamiya Extra Thin. So if a ghost seam shows up, it means that I used too much Tamiya Extra Thin on that and it still didn't have time to like fully cure and the plastic shrinks a little bit. So we'll see. It should be okay. I got the flaps glued on here and just tried to do it carefully. And the reason I did glued these on now instead of later after I painted it was because there really wasn't that good of a, or tight of a fit with these flaps. So if I'd have just put glue right in these parts right here, they still would have been a little wobbly and I think they could have broken off. So what I did is I glued those in those areas, got them all snug as I could, and then I used some Tamiya Extra Thin right along here to make sure these were nice and snug. I have a tendency sometimes to overglue. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put the front part of the canopy on. Now I'm gonna leave this part off because I'll have it where you can open it or close it. And since I can't really seal this very well, I'm afraid if I glue this down in the closed position, what's going to happen is I'm going to get fogging on the inside of my canopy, and that's just going to be a mess. Now, there are going to be issues trying to mask off the cockpit. I have an idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll tackle that in a little bit. So I've got to go ahead. I went ahead and I masked off the canopy. It took me a little while. The panel lines aren't real prominent along the frame, but I was able to do it, and I think it's going to look okay. It's not perfect, but it's going to be okay. So anyway, I'm going to wipe this off. You always want to like make sure that you got your fingerprints off the inside of the canopy here, okay? And how I'm going to do this is to align this properly. I'm going to go ahead and get this on here. Now, again, I'm not gluing this on, but I just want to tape this on here to give me some kind of a backing so I can get this front part of the canopy aligned. Okay. And you want to be careful doing it this way that you don't glue the actual back part down because that's not what I want to do, okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll try to get this aligned. Okay. Make sure that they're aligned on both sides. Take some Tamiya Extra Thin quick setting. Okay, I'm just going to use a little bit and I'm going to tack it down. And you can tell when the Tamiya Extra Thin gets up in there because you can kind of see it. And I'm just going to barely push it to get this tacked down. You don't want to squirt any melted plastic out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it like this. Now I don't want to put Tamiya extra thin right along here because then it runs a risk of wicking up and then gluing the back part of the canopy to it and then making a mess. So I'm going to leave it like this. I'm going to let it cure, so that way it won't be able to move too much. Then I'll lift this back part up, the back part of the canopy, and then I'll go ahead and then run some Tamiya extra thin right along both sides, and it should be nice and down. And then what I'll probably end up doing is just taking some Mr. Surfacer and run it along there to make sure I don't have any gaps. Fill that in, and I can wipe the rest away, the excess away with some isopropyl alcohol. So I got a nice good seal right along the front of the canopy there. Masking. So what I'm gonna try is I've got this stuff called parafilm, and it's like a waxy type. It's not like saran wrap, it's really waxy. So let me, you can cut it out. And I got this from, where did I get this from? I forgot, I'll think of it here in a second. But it's this waxy film and you can stretch it and it kind of sticks to itself. Now, you can come in here with poster putty, but poster putty is like a little stiff and a little hard, and I'm afraid it's going to break some of the fragile stuff. You can also wet tissue paper, but my issue with tissue paper is when you pull it out after it dries, it gets a bunch of stuff everywhere. So I think the parafilm is going to be the key. So you can see I've went ahead and I've done my best to mask off. I'm going to have to come in here and touch up with a brush anyway, but I went ahead and mask off with tape the area, the windscreen here, and then the back. And then I'll use this parafilm to do the rest. So let's just pull this off the backing. I think I got this off Amazon, I think. Okay. So I'm just gonna pull it out and stretch it a little bit. And what I can do, I'll just take a toothpick. Just kind of shape it around my pilot here. I can fold it in on itself. And again, I am probably going to get some overspray in where I don't want it, but it is what it is. This is just a hard model to mask off. This. Oh, I got this idea from the Grumpy Modeler. He recommended this stuff. He's used it in like different types of applications, where he kind of uses it as like tape to mask off stuff. I really haven't done that, but I have used it in this way before. As you can see, it holds its shape and kind of almost sticks to itself, but it's not sticky because it's almost like just a wax film. Push it against the side. Now this would have been easier if I didn't have the pilot in here, because I could just run tape across this. Since I did put a pilot in there, I can't really do that. So we will see how this works out. At least I know I won't probably have to touch up on the pilot itself. Okay. I want to add a little bit more in there. Just going to kind of squish it in there. And I will try to be careful when I spray around the cockpit that I don't flood the zone. All right. I think that's going to work, fellas. I think. All right. There we go. Perfect. All right. And this does, like I said, hold its shape, so I shouldn't have to worry about it. I will just have to be careful when I do masking, because I think I'm going to paint the star and bar insignia and some numbers on the front. I don't think I'm going to use the kit decals for this one. I think I'm going to make up my own plane. So I will have to be careful that I don't, my tape doesn't pull this out. But there we go. I think I got it masked off to where I'm not going to get too much overspray in there. And we should be good to go. Okay, this is going to end this video. On the next video, we're going to prime it. We're going to paint it. I'm not going to do hairspray chipping on this one. I think I'm going to do what Plasmo did on his and just hand brush some chipping. And I know that's not typically the best, the most realistic, but I think that's going to be easier to do. And I think it'll end up looking okay. So I appreciate you watching, and I will catch you on the next episode.